Welcome back. Now, taking a look at eating disorders this morning, and this is, of course, something that silently affects millions of people of all ages and races with severe and potentially life-threatening conditions in some instances. Now, these are characterized by disturbances in behavior, thoughts, as well as feelings towards body weight and shape, and with individuals often hiding their symptoms and not seeking the necessary treatment due to shame and stigma. On our Health Matters segment this morning, we take a look at this silent killer and also the multidisciplinary treatments that are available. And joining us for this, we have in studio with us Anele Honono, who's a clinical psychologist, as well as a registered dietitian, Eliana Dawood. Ladies, thanks so much for coming through. So, you know, when we talk about eating disorders, it's a very tough one. It's a very complex one. But if we were to try and give a definition that would be helpful to our viewers, Anele, how could we describe this?
So I'd say it's a struggle where someone cannot have a healthy relationship with food, be able to deal with food in social context, be able to take what their bodies need in order to survive and do daily tasks. And on top of that, there's a lot of body distortions or body perceptions that are negative. And unlike the average person who might not like certain traits, but accept their body generally, people with eating disorders really find that it takes up a lot of their mind space and energy trying to manage weight and eating, which is very debilitating to their functioning and their general medical and mental health.
So just to that point, are eating disorders generally associated with overeating, or could there also be a situation where people just avoid food altogether?
Both, actually. So most people vacillate between restricting, eating very little food, but most of us can't maintain that for long. So we then fluctuate to overeating. And that's why most diets don't work. However, some people are able to maintain that control over food for an extended period of time, where they will then eventually reach an underweight range where there's various medical complications that can come from that.
Eliana, you know, from a dietitian's perspective, when we think about food and having a healthy relationship with food, it obviously has to start at birth. You know, how do we encourage parents to perhaps set a better foundation so that their children don't have to struggle with eating disorders later on in life?
I think it's very important to think about how bodies and food is spoken about within the home, and that language actually does matter. And so if we start at a very young age to kind of pathologize bodies, or have our parents maybe be quite body conscious, or talk about food and bodies in ways that are quite negative, that can be something that the child then learns, because children learn by watching us and seeing how we interact with food and how we interact and treat our bodies. So I think that's a very important thing to think about as parents, is how do we model a healthy relationship with food, a healthy relationship with our bodies.
So what does that look like generally, you know, a healthy relationship with food? What should parents be modeling for their young children, you know, when it comes to food, what we ought to and ought not to be eating excessively, those sort of things?
See, I think the very important thing to think about is that we all need to figure out what is our moderation. So as parents, we will be providing the food for our children, and our children ultimately need to be the ones that are choosing what is it that they would want to eat, how much of what is provided would they want to have, so that a child can learn to be more in tune with themselves, and as they grow, tap into that instead of turning towards the outside world, which we know is rife with diet culture and, you know, good food versus bad food. And so we need to move away from looking at things in an all or nothing kind of way.
And I like that, you know, Anele, something you mentioned as well, you know, when it comes to eating disorders, it's not just the individual that's affected. It becomes, you know, a family, a societal issue when someone is struggling.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we can't underplay the effect that struggling with eating disorders plays on the whole family system. Outside of what Eliana is mentioning about kind of what we taught from our upbringing, we've seen families being very negatively affected by having to support someone who's struggling with an eating disorder, because they don't know what the right thing or the wrong thing to say or do is. And you find that they need in treatment of the patient support themselves in order to guide them on what's helpful and what's not helpful, because unfortunately diet culture has infiltrated our thinking, and it's become so normalized that we actually, even in everyday language, use this diet culture heavy thinking and speaking.
So we have to start wrapping, but I just want to look at, you know, some of the warning signs, some of the symptoms that parents and everybody in society basically can look out for if someone is perhaps struggling. What are we looking for?
So I think the most common, well-known are things like restricting of food. Someone used to eat a wide variety of food and suddenly they cut out food groups or types of food, labeling foods as good or bad, wanting to manage their own food more independently instead of it being a communal or family experience. And then there's more quiet, unfortunately, symptoms like purging, for example, that a lot of people will do in secret and often will only be picked up with medical examination like blood tests, where we start seeing irregularities that might indicate that there could be purging happening. Excessive and obsessive exercise is also a problem that we often note. And I think most common is change in someone's socializing ability. So from a more full life to more restrictive, not going out to events, not going out to see people, because obviously you can't control what's going to be served and comments that you might get from people. So a lot of social isolation is also quite common.
And Eliana, you know, just in conclusion, we are bombarded everywhere we turn with talks about, as you say, good and bad foods and what we ought to and ought not to be doing and eating. But, you know, as a rule of thumb, as a dietitian, what would be a good spread for someone over, say, a 24-hour day?
So I think it would be important to tune into hunger and fullness cues, and it would be different for each and every person. So there is no like textbook answer that I can give you. And so it is important to remember that we need to tune into ourselves, try and figure out what would actually hit the spot for us right now. Otherwise we can be left with a sense of deprivation, which will then lead us into other behaviors like overeating, binge eating. And so it is very individual for each person. But to include every single food group, if that's my take-home message, is every single food group plays a valuable role in mental, physical, emotional health.
Including fun foods.
Yes.
What people call junk food.
Yes, you see, my kind of girls. Yes, fun food should be part of it. But, you know, such important messages there from our guest this morning, Anele Honono, who's a clinical psychologist and registered dietitian, Eliana Dawood, talking to us about the impact of eating disorders.